now, actually a little after, and we should start. So let's go down the line and introduce everybody. Have you introduce yourself and tell a little bit about your audio connection.
Hey,
and
it's Tom.
Tom has to talk. You need to say hello at least when we get to you, and you're last on the list, so you'll have time to think about it. But welcome. So Gary, go first.
I am first, and I'm noticing that Tom Fine has no microphone or camera.
I see that he has a microphone.
Go figure. No, his chat comment says he has no mic or camera.
Oh, okay. I'm not looking at chat. Okay, well, type something. And
therefore, he's just lurking, he says. All he can do is lurk.
Well, he can chat.
We can talk about him.
Yeah.
He can chat, and we can read it.
I am Gary. I normally am the recording guy at the University of Washington School of Music, but they're, of course, shut down now. Everything's virtual, so I'm now a video editor.
My condolences.
I'm making the graduation video where the students all submitted their photos and you just slap them together and put a little pomp and circumstance underneath as a bed. So. And I am the secretary of the AES Pacific Northwest section, and I am the chair of the Tellers Committee for the worldwide AES. Thank you.
Which is the elections. Okay, thanks, Gary. Tommaso.
Hello, everyone. I'm Tommaso. I'm a recording engineer and musician. I enjoy recording and working with jazz and acoustic musicians in particular. I enjoy designing and building tube equipment, and I met Dan through my involvement at the Rudy Van Gelder studio, their legendary jazz recording studio.
All right, thanks, Tommaso. Gordon.
Hi, I'm Gordon McGregor from Scotland. Basically did PA and stuff for most of my friends' bands because I was crap at playing instruments.
That it?
Yeah, that's it.
Okay, thank you. Janie.
Oh, hi, I'm Janie Wallach, and I used to record live music when the clubs were open and the festivals weren't all canceled.
Yeah, really. All right, thanks. Rick.
Oh, well, I'm Rick Chinn, and I'm a lifelong audio guy. And I've done everything from repairing the stuff to doing live sound to recording to designing the stuff for manufacturers, written manuals that people actually read. And these days I'm retired, and I'm the webmaster for the Pacific Northwest section. And I've been on the committee too long, so they said, okay, you can be committee at large. So here I am, larger than ever. Let's see, what else? Oh, I should give my usual disclaimer. I don't do lights, I don't do video, and I definitely don't do ladders.
All right, thanks, Rick. Katie.
Hey, I'm Katie Gray. I'm an architectural acoustical consultant with Stantec, and also a musician. And you know what? I really don't like ladders either, but I feel like I do that way too often for my job.
Ooh.
Yeah.
It's nice being in speaker view because Rick appeared with his movement right at the same time, right at the right moment, full screen after Katie said that. That was great. All right, anything else, Katie? Sorry.
No, I think that about covers it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I got a comment.
What?
I got a comment.
What?
Katie is tasked with making a silk purse out of a sow's ear in our building.
Oh. All right. Well, good luck with that.
I think there's options.
Beyond dynamite?
I hope you'll think about talking about that to us in the future, because I think that would be interesting, having been both a student there and working in that room.
Oh, sure. Well, I was never a student there, but
I was.
Oh, you were a student there.
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So there you go. Okay, thank you. So I'm going by this list that keeps jumping around. Luke.
Sure. I'm Luke Pacholski. By day, I'm a software developer, which really has nothing to do with audio, but I've been interested since I was about, 6 years old, plugging tape recorders into radios and things like that. For the past several years, I've been hosting house concerts, recording those, record other shows occasionally. I have musician friends that come over and record, just generally interested in audio and mastering, things like that. That's it.
Now I think I know you've never been to New York, so where's that picture? Is that Ireland?
So I don't have a webcam on my desktop right now, so that photo is from downtown Madison, Wisconsin. So I went in non-COVID times. I work in Madison, but have been living in Milwaukee for the past 4+ years, I guess.
All right. Okay, good. Thank you. And now Rich.
Tom has a mic, so I think he can go at some point too.
Yes.
So I'm Rich Capeless, and I'm a math teacher by trade, and I have a background as an amateur audio engineer, and take an interest in the history of audio engineering, and particularly in Rudy Van Gelder, and I'm an associate member of the Audio Engineering Society.
All right, thank you. And Tom, you have a mic now? You got to unmute it. You might, oh, where are you? There you are. You're unmuted, but I don't hear you. Did you test your mic on Zoom? You go up to the preferences, or else click the caret next to the mute button. Tom, mic not working, damn it. Well, shoo phooey.
I got his photo if you want to see what he looks like here.
Yeah. Current? On the right.
Yeah, so you can tell him from his brothers.
Yeah. His name was hidden, so I couldn't see it. Did I get everybody there? Is everybody here? I think so.
I think so.
Okay, good. Thank you, everyone, for doing this. This has been really fun. I'm really looking forward to hearing what we have to hear today. So I think without further ado, let's go to Gordon.
Okay. So, get this thing back up.
And this again is about Charlie Watkins and Wem.
If I can, back one. So, rumor has it this is Charlie Watkins. I don't remember Charlie Watkins looking like that, but I don't remember his earlier years in PA and stuff like that. So, therefore, it's quite possible.
This guy looks lanky.
Yeah, he was a short little guy. That's why I don't think that actually is him. But the picture credit says it is, but I didn't think it is. I think it's one of the other guys, probably John Thompson, who was one of his engineers at the time and of a similar age to him. So I suspect it might well have been him. Anyway, Charlie Watkins, what did we say about him? Watkins Electric Music. Charlie started the UK PA systems, shall we say, a bit like Bill Hanley and Bob Heil in the US, and probably the Clare brothers as well. The thing about Charlie was, and also about the UK at that time, was the UK had getting American equipment into the UK just wasn't possible, and there was huge cash. You couldn't spend money easily into foreign countries. There was massive tax and whatever and anything coming in and out of the country, because the country was still trying to recover from the Second World War in the 50s and early 60s. It was just not possible. So Charlie and his brothers had a record shop in East London. And then Charlie had been a musician before that and played accordion and with a guitarist. And due to that, he'd started developing guitar amps, because the guitar couldn't be heard above the crowds. It was acoustic guitars. And he started to do quite well with the guitar amps because you couldn't buy the American ones. And Vox and Selmer, who were the only other real builders of amps in the late 50s, were really still quite expensive. And his stuff was a lot cheaper. Gradually, he got into doing, got to know more and more musicians. And he ended up tying up with a man called Pemberton, who ran a club called the Marquee Club in London. And through that, he ended up doing this, which is the famous Rolling Stones free gig in Hyde Park. And up at the top there is a whole stack of column speakers. And these are what Charlie became famous for. And for 6 or 7 years from 1966 onwards, these were pretty much the only PA you saw anywhere outside, especially in the UK. How he got there is probably a bit of a story, because what happened was this was his first PA that he sort of sold. These are two little 10-inch speakers, little 3 in each cabinet, and that folds in and it becomes portable. And then that's a 30-watt valve mixer amp based on his guitar amps, really. And that was his PA that he tried to sell to McGuinn from the Byrds when they came over on tour in the late 1964 or 5. And he fell on his ass, basically. It just didn't work. And it sent him back into a bit of a state. Charlie was one of these guys that if somebody said if he got himself in a corner, he would always try and think his way out of it. At the same time as this was happening, Jim Marshall and the like was starting to build bigger and noisier guitar amps. And his guitar amp market was beginning to fall over a little bit. And he really needed to find another mode of business. Now, unlike Bill Hanley and Bob Heil, Charlie was a good businessman, and he was always looking for options, always looking for ways of making money and selling stuff. He was fortunate in a way that he owned a factory that was making guitars and guitar amps, so he could go away and play with stuff and make it work and see what could go. So his next stage after this, after he honestly really did get his head handed to him, he actually had to go and buy Tannoy loudspeakers to continue that tour with the Byrds. So he made no money from that at all. So his next thing were these. And these are the column speakers that you see on all the pictures of the likes of, the Hyde Park concerts and The Who and whatever in the late 60s, early 70s. These ones are 4x10s. And the difference between Charlie's ones and the Marshall ones and the Vox ones that you see the Beatles using and whatever from this era was he went to hi-fi speakers. He used Goodman and Celestion hi-fi speakers inside these rather than guitar amp speakers, which meant they had a bit more low end about them and they actually sounded quite a little bit better. They didn't have the really mid-honky sort of noise that if you've ever heard Vox columns from that era, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. So he had these ones, which were the original ones, the 4 or 6x10s with the Goodman and sometimes Peerless and occasionally ELAC speakers inside them. And then he went for these ones, which were the 4x12s, and these were the ones that they got used outdoors. Some of them had a small horn about the centre, just about here, but majority of them were 4x10s, but with a second horn on the cone. I can't find a picture of that, unfortunately. I've been searching around looking for a picture of them. But basically, they were like dual concentric speakers, but they didn't have a separate coil. You just had a little raised cone in the middle of the driver. And then we got this. And here we go. Here's a couple of 4x12s at either side of the stage. And the band playing, believe it or not, is Fleetwood Mac. It's probably one of their very, very first concerts that they ever did. And these were the outdoor concerts that this guy, Hugh Pemberton, and a guy called Pete Jenner, who was part of the Pink Floyd scene and the Marquee Club scene, were doing. And they managed to get Charlie to do these gigs. Charlie saw them as a means of promotion. He was also quite friendly with a lot of the band guys because they used WEM amps, or they would come and get him to fix their guitars. Some of these guitars, his brother built guitars, and you couldn't buy a Fender Strat in the UK unless you were, quite wealthy. A Fender Strat in the UK was probably a year's wages, literally, for a normal working man in the late 50s, early 60s. So the Rapier guitars and the Dallas guitars were what everybody started with at the very least. And Charlie sold those. So he knew everybody. He knew all these young guys. So then he went on to this, and what you ended up with were these, which are the 4x12s. This thing here, this skinny guy has a bunch of horns inside it. Or you could buy this one, which was a combination unit. Charlie's preferred lineup was one of these, two of these, and one of these in between it. This here has got a bunch of horns stuck inside it. That's two of them. No, I've not got a picture. Basically, I think it's four running up and down either side of it, and I had a crossover in it. And it acted as a high frequency thing for his 12-inch speakers. And that actually worked quite well. And it was one of these that I ended up doing sound with at first. And if everything was working correctly, it was fragile. If everything was working correctly, in a small room, it worked pretty well. Then the next thing that he developed was a man called Neil Sargent, who was his electronics engineer at the time, was this. Probably one of the first transistorized portable amplifiers. This is the famous slave amp, the WEM slave amp. An SL100, 100 watts of glorious power, but it worked. It was far, far lighter than the equivalent valve amps. Macintosh amps were never heard of in the UK at that time. Again, ridiculously expensive if they did come over here, and just not at all available. There was some of the WEM stuff and some of the Vox stuff and some of the Marshall stuff, which was literally, and Selmer stuff as well. But none of them were much more than 30 to 40 watts, maybe 60 watts on a good day. Selmer made a 100-watt amp, but the trouble with it was it overheated and would burn out if you looked at it the wrong way. So this is the output side of it. Just a mono amp, mono slave amp, no volume controls or anything on it. The circuit was actually virtually the same as it. That's the entire insides of the thing. It was virtually the exact same layout as a simple valve amp, except it used two pairs of transistors. It was basically an RCA demonstration circuit brought alive by Neil Sargent, who was a radio engineer who worked for Charlie. Charlie was never an electronics expert. He was more of a concept guy, and then he would get people to build things for him. That's the circuit diagram there for it. I can let people see that later, but effectively the speakers are part of the circuit. And if you ran this thing without the speakers attached to it, it was amp fricassee within about 10 or 15 minutes, especially if you were driving a signal into it, just like a valve amp, I guess, in many ways. But they worked, and I used a few of these things over the years, and they were actually surprisingly good. Terrible earth hum on them, though, and used to recommend taking the earths off the amplifiers, which was as dodgy as all hell, but hey, it's what you did in those days, unfortunately. But his real breakthrough in PA world was this thing. This is an Audio Master, and this guy really was way ahead of his time. He's very coy, and he never explained who it was that actually did the design work for this. The concept came from him and his Belgian and French importers. They come up with the idea, but who actually designed the electronics for this is lost in the mist of time. Looking at it and looking at it physically, I suspect it was somebody working in Abbey Road with EMI who did it on the quiet, because EMI were ridiculously, they wouldn't let anybody know what was in their mixers. And like you still to this day can't easily get schematics of the older EMI stuff, especially the transistorized stuff. And this is mine, and this is a late one, but because it's got the foldback sends here, which is what these knobs here are. So basically from each channel you've got presence, like high treble, normal treble, bass, reverb send. This one's got the pre-fade for the monitor send, and then the mixer. Oops, it is it. Back a couple, hold on, sorry. Stupid computer. Go back. The inputs are actually down here. And there's jacks down here, and this is the gain knobs here as well. These little guys here are the actual sensitivity knobs. The original ones, believe it or not, didn't have those on them. And they had to, when they went to the Windsor Festival the first time they used this thing in anger, they had to actually make a bodge to put a pad in, basically a pad switch in, because Arthur Brown was the headline act, and apparently nearly blew the thing to bits. But this actually had balanced ins and balanced outs, all on jack. But still, it was all balanced ins and balanced outs. The other thing it had, let's see, I can't get a picture of it there, was it had a link button on it, a link connector on it. Now, on the earlier ones, when you linked out, that master volume was overridden and it went down the chain. On the later ones, the master route stayed connected. That was Bob Pridden from The Who that wanted that. And I'll talk about that in a wee minute or two, how he used to link them up and use them. I used this for a while. I got this in a couple of those 12-inch columns and a couple of those horn columns and a couple of SL100s. They were in a second-hand shop. We were probably the second or third generation to use it. And, you know, this thing still works. It's getting up for 50 years old, and it still works. I've done nothing to it. There's a couple of slightly crackly pots, but honestly, it's such a simple and well-made piece of kit that it still works. So these are your master outs. That was from mono headphone amps. This is your reverb. You could select actually reverb built in, and you could select different types of reverb. He recommends never using 4 in a live environment because apparently it causes feedback. I never got past 1 with mine, but that's the way it worked. And this here is your solo bus. So you click it to 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, and you heard the thing, and then A was the reverb output, and B was letting you hear the actual mixer output. Then you could switch individual channels into the reverb with these black knobs down here, or shut the whole thing down. The reverb was just a simple spring reverb, but it worked. You know, it worked pretty well. That's some of the channel strips on the thing. Very basic.
Excuse me, Gordon. What's the meter reading? Are you able to?
The meter reads the main output or the channel, whatever you've selected here on this guy. Whatever you select on here, it reads that. Basically, this knob controls what that meter and what the headphone amp or headphone output
Got it.
lets you hear.
Thank you.
Just like a modern desk, the solo bus, basically, yeah. That's the inputs channel strips. Simple Baxendale EQs. There's 1 transistor, I think, or 2 maybe at most transistors on each input stage on it. Works. Remarkably quiet, actually, from a hiss perspective. It still hums like a bugger if you're not careful with it, but the hiss-wise, it's remarkably quiet. Probably because it doesn't actually have that much gain, I guess, but it's not too bad. And this is how they were used for The Who and people like that. Now, Bob Pridden was The Who's sound engineer, and between him and Pete West from Pink Floyd, another guy called Dinky Dawson, these were the guys that stretched these things. So this thing here, from what I can see, I've zoomed in these pictures earlier, is basically vocals. There's some drum inputs there, you can see them, bass drum, snare drum, overhead, rack tom. There's something here about a drum, I can't quite make out what it is. I think it's drum vocal, and these are the vocal mics here. And these chain together from here. You would chain them into another input. There was a chain input, and then it would chain again. Now, these ones were the ones that Bob Pridden had, and these ones didn't override the masters. So basically, it's subgroups by using these and these and these. And then the final signal would come out. And then the thing that used to drive you crazy with WEMKit, because the amps were quite small, you basically ran 2 columns off of each amp. And you had to chain hundreds of the damn things together. Now, that was fine as long as you could keep the amps out of the way of footprint ways and made sure the earths were all singing from the same earth point. If somebody walked across them, because everyone was jacks, the cables just got pulled out, and you could spend hours hunting for the offending jack cable that would get yanked out. Charlie used to pile them all up in behind the individual stacks, and that worked quite well. But those of us that didn't have the big long cables, or I'm sure he had slightly modified amps as well that worked better on the end of long cable runs. We couldn't get away with that. And I don't know how many times for the 2 or 3 years I used these things that I lost the signal somewhere because a jack got pulled out, or an enthusiastic singer ran around and pulled the jack actually straight out of the mixer, which was not a lot of fun. Sometimes you had to chase it through a crowd because it was getting pulled along the ground somewhere. And that's the last big successful gig that Charlie ever did with his PA. Or in fact, it was an unsuccessful gig, really. It was the one that killed him. After that, he really went back to working, and his kit really went back to doing what it was better at, doing smaller rooms or quieter bands. This is the Isle of Wight, the second Isle of Wight festival, 1970. It's the one after Woodstock. And Jimi Hendrix played here. The Who, this is actually the Who's PA, largely with about half of the Pink Floyd's PA added into it. You can see the Pink Floyd stuff there because it's got the horns mounted on the top. Theirs were slightly specially built again. A lot of it was very non-standard. You never knew quite what was there if you were buying a packet of it. You never knew. You had to go look in the back and see what was there. What happened here was they moved this festival site up onto a hill. And it's quite windy in the Isle of Wight. And poor old Charlie, all the sound disappeared off the back of the stage, and far more people than were meant to come, just like Woodstock, turned up in the site, and you just couldn't hear the sound. It actually got quite ugly. There were no real riots, but it got pretty close to it. But the one thing I want to show here is, see this red circle here in a satellite dish? That's actually a 10-inch speaker, Goodman speaker, and that black dot. And then it goes on to that, and that's a parabolic reflector. And that was really the only proper treble this whole rig had. That went from about 1K up to 3 or 4K of that. And it's no wonder at all it didn't work properly. I've actually heard that thing work. I heard that work at a gig, an outdoor gig in Glasgow, in Edinburgh actually, many years ago. And yeah, you could hear it, but it was a real beam. You were lucky if there was, 30, 40 degrees spread off that thing. And it did work, but it just shows you the brilliance of the wee guy. He came up with this idea after seeing the satellite dishes near his mum's house. And he worked out, how to do that, even though he was not really an electronics engineer. He was full of some quite clever ideas.
That actually predates the Meyer product of
yes, it does.
Design by a long time.
He developed that in 1968, 69.
Yeah.
But he only really used it maybe 2 or 3. He used it at Hyde Park once. He used it at the Reading Festival a few times, because Charlie got his break with this guy Hugh Pemberton, who had the National Jazz Festival, which was held in Windsor at first. And I told you Windsor would come into it somewhere along the line. That's where I went to school a few years later. And then that got moved to a place called Sudbury, which is where I think that picture was taken that claims to be him, sitting with the desk at the side. And then it went to Reading and became the Reading Festival of Fame and horror and whatever else. At Sudbury, they had a stage collapse, actually, so, things don't change, eh? But he got all these gigs, from a standing start. He literally went from that to that in, 6 years? Not even 6 years, 4 years. This was 1970, so 4 years. At the same time as this was getting done, the Pink Floyd were running around with a quadraphonic system based on WEM equipment. Quite an amazing feat. And the thing about Charlie was he was quite a lot older. I always forget how young people like, Pete Townsend and the guys from Pink Floyd, the guys from Rolling Stones and that were in the 60s. I mean, Keith Moon, was 21 then, I think, actually. He was quite, and the guys from Deep Purple, for example, Ian Pace was 19 in 1969 when he did a gig in the Albert Hall. And yet Charlie was in his mid-40s, and late 40s actually by this time. But he was a friend of all of these guys. They used to turn up at his factory. And I actually went there with my cousin in Oldbury. And you'd walk in and you never knew who you were going to meet. I remember seeing David Bowie in there. David Bowie stayed not far from the factory. And he spent a lot of time in Charlie's factory in the early days, playing his guitars and just hanging around in the place. Because Charlie would tolerate the youngsters. And I think that's how partly his equipment was good by the standards of the day. It worked. He could make it work, and he was willing to go out and work all hours of the day to make it work. But he was also a really good customer relations guy. And I think that's something some of us have to learn sometimes. It's not just about the kit, it's how you actually deploy it and how you go about with your people. John Thompson, the guy that worked with him as a roadie as such, he was an amazing character. I've met him a few times. He's still alive. And he's a really pleasant man, despite all the hassle. I mean, they were up to all hours of the nights and days trying to get this rig to work, and it didn't work. But, they kept it together. I mean, Hendrix had a bad day there. I think it was towards the end, and, Hendrix was really starting to get into the bad ways with the drugs and stuff by the time he did this gig. And I've heard... If this is 1970,
sorry to interrupt you, if this is 1970, this is the last gig that he did.
Yeah, it's certainly the last one he did in the UK. And you have to remember that Hendrix.
Last one ever. He died after this, within a week or so after this.
Yeah,
and there's a video. There's multiple videos. One is just Hendrix at the Isle of Wight, and there's another one that's the entire festival. And I think it was Murray Lerner who made that, who also did the Newport festivals. But
it was recorded and filmed. That's amazing. It was recorded and filmed, and I knew that. Yeah. But Hendrix didn't cover it. The whole thing, this whole gig, just the Isle of Wight county or local authority, refused to let concerts be held ever again outdoors on Isle of Wight for many, many years.
I have that video, and it's great.
Yeah.
Message to love, Dan.
Yes, exactly.
Yep. And then you have this. Now, I don't know how much of this can you see. Can you see that I've got this was probably the ultimate WEM system. This was the stuff that belonged to Pink Floyd, or the Pink Floyd as they were known in those days. So this was actually, I think, the first or second gig, the tour that they did, that they left Syd Barrett standing in London. The WEM gear suited them because they were a quieter and more melodic band. The Who had one of probably the biggest WEM system in the 70s. But it didn't really suit them. It didn't suit the bass and the sort of sheer harshness of the Who at the time. But these guys, because they were more melodic and worked with it a little bit more, they got a lot more use out of their WEM kit. They also used WEM backline as well in those days. And I saw this stuff. I saw this tour actually, and I can remember, and of course it's the old rose-tinted glasses thing. You think it sounded better than it did. But I actually do believe that it sounded pretty good. But by this time, Charlie himself was starting to give up with the festival and the touring thing. I think he was scared that people were getting hurt at the gigs. He himself had got a bottle across the head, which is why he tended to mix on the side stage. And, people were getting stabbed, and it became quite ugly for a while in the UK at these gigs. And he kind of given up with it. And so this was probably getting towards the end of his time. I think it's in 1971 or 2, thereabouts. And I liked his kit. And what happened was ultimately all this stuff passed down to the small bands, the local bands and whatever else. It wasn't expensive to start with. Charlie, I don't know if he must have made money because he was successful, but he had a factory, he had two shops at one time and whatever. But I'm never quite sure how he did it. But we got a lot of this kit as young people. I mean, 15-year-old Gordon in the early 70s was running around with equipment that had the Who and the Slade badges on the back of it. That Audiomaster mixer of mine, that was definitely one that at one time or other Rob Pridden used. Whether he used it with the Who or somebody else, I don't know. The stuff worked. There's no two ways about it. It worked. Did he do better than Bob Hanley and Bob Heil? I think he did with the resources he had. Because you have to remember, as I said, UK didn't have the big, huge scene. These bands that I've talked about, Fleetwood Mac, Pink Floyd, The Who, the Rolling Stones, Yes, Jethro Tull, all these guys really circled round the marquee club and, the stuff that Andrew Loog Wogan and Pete what's his name again? Sorry. Pete Jenner and that were putting on. These guys were the main promoters, and these guys all hung around them. It was a very limited thing, and yet Charlie managed to make a good living out of that for a while. And I was amazed when I started reading through all this stuff. I'd forgotten how young all the bands were, and B, just how much older and he was. And, the fact that he managed to get them to come and talk to him, and he would always be willing to try a new thing and try ideas. I mean, rumour has it, either Bob Pridden or Charlie, depending who you listen to, they were amongst the first to turn speakers back round onto the stage so that they could hear themselves. And doing, just willing to try something that nobody else had done, I think, was part of the game. There was a lot of good fortune involved in it as well, I guess, that the scene was so compacted, it let them build it up so quickly. But yeah, it was good fun. And then this last picture, I think, Luke, this is kind of where you take over here. This is the Who at Leeds. Now, I've done this gig. And I'd been in this building, and I did this without out the back of a 3.5-ton van. I don't think you get all of that out of a 3.5-ton van. So what you have here, over on the left here, and there's an equivalent stack on the right, is you have all the later WEM stuff that they used. This is not all of the Who's WEM gear.
You're stealing my show, Gordon.
Yeah, I'm sorry. But this was all his stuff. And this was probably the last time the Who used the WEM gear. I would say this little tour that they did, would probably be the last time. After that, they went on to the Kelsey and the Morris stuff. And Dave Martin started to appear with the Martin gear around about this time as well. The other thing was amplifiers. The Crown DC300 came out and started to become available over here at reasonable cost because the money restrictions got took away in the late 60s, in 1970, I think it was. And they became available and people were willing to buy them. And I think that's all really you need to say there. Any sort of questions or anything like that if you want to ask?
Gordon, in this picture, what's that stuff in the upper right balcony there? There's a bunch of...
Oh, I think that's dimmers. I've been looking at that myself.
Oh, yeah.
I think that's lighting dimmers. It looks suspiciously like early Strand lighting dimmers.
That makes sense.
But I don't know, actually, is the answer. Most of the Strand lighting dimmers I remember from that era were vertical things.
Yeah.
But it could be early versions of that.
And Rick asked in the picture just before this if the multi-cell horns were made by Vitavox.
He used both Vitavox and Celestian stuff. I think those ones probably were Vitavox, but there was also Celestian horns kicking around. That little narrow box I showed you at the start, that's all Celestian that's in that. Mm-hmm. I forget the actual model number of it now, and I don't have one anymore to go and see, but it was Celestian stuff that was in that. So I suspect they probably were Vitavox that was in there because they were better in those days. Celestian, they were good at making 12-inch and cone speakers, but I'm not entirely sure they got the horn thing sorted out too well in those days.
I went and saw Fleetwood Mac at Eagles Auditorium during the Peter Green era, which must have been 68 or early 69. Yeah. And they brought their own WEM PA, which that was the first time I ever saw anything.
Yeah, and Charlie Watkins was probably there with that gig as well, actually.
Wow. It was much tinier boxes, it seemed, and there were a whole bunch of little tiny things that they were stacked up. They put them on the floor, not up on the stage, because the stage was already full of the house PA, and they stacked it in front, and it was like 8 or 10 feet high and 5 or 6 feet wide, and it looked like it was about 6 inches deep.
That's right. Yeah, they were very, very shallow.
Very shallow.
There was just enough space to fit. If you take the back off of one of those columns, the back of the magnet is literally bouncing off the back wall of the cabinet.
And I'll never forget when they went to test it, the first guy up there said, "Hello, Tacoma!" And it was pretty loud.
Yeah. I mean, his biggest claim to fame in the 60s, with that first gig, the one at the Rolling Stones one, it was a 1,000 watt PA.
Amazing.
It was a lot of PA for his day, you know what I mean? Especially when you consider it was all chained together with jack cables.
That was one of my questions for you. It's all tip ring cables. No
tip ring send. No, most of it was balanced. The amplifiers were actually electronically balanced. The Audio Master actually has a transformer balanced out. There's a little transformer stuck on the back end of it. The Audio Master predates the slave amp by quite a bit, probably a year or so, which in Charlie, in that time, was quite a long time. He had the idea of the mixer long before he had the idea of the slave amp. He had a couple of engineers work with him. One was very tied to the tube or valve systems, and he had a younger guy called Neil Sargent who was very much into the solid state stuff. And Bill Purtis, who was the tube guy and the guy who'd worked with him all the way through the guitar amp era, he left in a bit of a huff just as they were starting to try and get these columns powered properly. And so the SL100 was a bit of a lash, really, to be honest. It was a hurry up, let's get something that works here, because Charlie, in his classic over-enthusiastic way, had committed to doing the National Jazz Festival like 6 weeks before they actually got the things working,
On the mixers, when you daisy chain those, if you leave the submaster, if you leave the masters in line, doesn't it, assuming we're going left to right, maybe, so that the mixer in the middle is master is controlling both the 5.
No, it was a kind of a. It wasn't like that. It was a kind. There was a. It's hard to explain.
So there's some kind of parallel and some.
Yeah, it was like a parallel input. There was a little combiner, a mixer combiner.
Yeah, okay.
In each one, you had to be very careful. You got the jacks in the right order. From memory, it's a red one and a white one. And I can't, for the life of me, remember the order they go. I think it was white to red.
Huh.
Or green to red.
So the output of the master and the input from the.
Yeah, were combined. There was a combiner circuit.
Yeah, there was a combining network, so they were separate. That makes sense. That's a cool.
It was quite a sophisticated little box, which is why I've got a sneaking suspicion. Now, in London in the early 60s, you had 3 fairly major recording studios, and they all custom built their own desks. They all used maybe 4 engineers. There was Neve, Rupert Neve is obviously the famous one. There was a couple other guys, though, that hung around that worked for EMI and worked for Trident, and some of them kind of, moonlighted a wee bit. And I've got a sneaking suspicion that at least one of those guys, I don't think Neve has nothing to do with it. It's nothing like a Neve design, but it does look awful like the insides of some of the early EMI stuff I've seen, Abbey Road stuff I've seen. But then again, a basic circuit, how can you change it? I mean, it uses a Baxendale EQ. It's a passive EQ, basically.
Rick's saying maybe Richard Swedenham?
Could be. It could be any of these guys. Do you know what I mean? I can't find it written down anywhere. I just cannot find it written down anywhere. They're very simple to maintain and they're very simple design. As I say, the one I've got, I bought it second or third hand in 1975. And I think I've replaced a couple of capacitors in the power supply. Other than that, I've not touched it. There's not even a crackly knob in it, believe it or not. The switch for the monitors crackles when it clicks over. I don't think it's never done that. I think it's always done that. But other than that, that thing works to this day,
Great, thank you. Any other questions?
Yeah, I had a question based on something you just said, Dan. You mentioned that the connections were tip ring.
They were tip ring. They were tip ring screen TRS.
Oh, you meant TRS.
Yeah.
Well, for the balance signals, but for a speaker out.
The speaker out was tip ring. Yeah, the speaker out on the amplifier was tip ring. Remember, this is unpowered. There's no amplifier in here. This is purely a mixer.
I guess I'm just confused as an amateur. I'm used to hearing TS tip sleeve for unbalanced.
Sorry, I misspoke. I misspoke. Thank you.
Oh, okay.
These white jacks here. These are the speaker outputs from the amplifier. And
tip sleeve.
And that there is the input, and that's the slave link output. Now these are tip ring sleeve. These are balanced.
Gotcha. Cool. Okay, that's cool. I get it now.
Great. Thanks, Rich. Anything else? Anybody?
I was wondering if this mixer is mono clearly, but was it ever done to have 2 of them side by side and feed it to different speakers, like a fake stereo kind of thing? Or
there is apparently at least one was built called a Stereo Master. I have never seen it. There is a picture in the WEM. If you're interested in WEM stuff, there's a very good owners club called the WEM Owners Club, and they have quite a decent website, though it's not been updated in recent years, but it's got a good bunch of pictures on it, which is where most of these pictures have come from, to be fair. I don't know. I suspect people like Rob Pridden, certainly the guys from Pink Floyd, definitely deployed them in some way or other to get stereo and quadraphonic around. How they actually did it is probably, if you'd have to go digging around on the Floyd website to see how they actually did it. I do remember there being a kind of 4-way pot network that they used to do it, but I suspect that the signal was actually still mono, but just getting divided, if you know what I mean.
Yes, thank you. That was interesting. That's cool. I had a question for you. Is there Transformers on the way in, or is it just
it's Transformer?
Oh, it is. Okay.
Transformers. Yeah. I don't know if you can actually see them. Hang on. No, you can't, because the way that photograph's taken, you can't actually see the Transformer. But there are Transformers on the input stage, yeah.
Okay, that's cool.
There's also one on the outputs for the link one, and the main out has also got Transformer balanced out on it as well. As I say, these predate the amplifier by quite a bit, by at least a year. This was an idea that Charlie had and couldn't sell until he had to make his slave amp. As I say, he made that in a bit of a hurry just so he had some way of honouring an agreement that he'd made, you know.
All right, any other questions?
Hey, just one from me. Can you guys hear?
Barely.
This better?
Yes.
So, Gordon, thank you. That was really interesting. The question I have is, Pink Floyd, do you know what microphones they used with the WEM rig?
Any pictures I've seen of the Floyd in that era, it was largely Sennheiser. What was the predecessor to the 609? Whatever that was. And
409?
MD. Sorry?
409?
Yeah, I think it was. The gold one, the one with the gold and black, the flat guy with the gold and black on it.
I know.
I can't remember what it was now. That and the MD41s. Any ones I saw earlier than that would have been AKG D12s or Shure Unidynes, largely.
Okay, I see Rich's hand raised. I'm not sure what that means.
Rich would probably know better than me, to be fair.
That was from before. I should put it down, I guess.
Okay.
Lower hand. There we go.
All right, thanks. All right, anything else? I see Luke's back. Thanks, Gordon. That was really terrific. Appreciate it a lot.
I think I'm going to put that as my desktop.
Yeah. So, Luke, go ahead and click share your screen, and you will get Gordon's, well, okay. There you go.
All right, there we go. So picking up a little bit where Gordon left off, just talking about the Who's Live at Leeds, recorded February 14th, 1970 at the University Refectory at the University of Leeds in England. Just to start, a lot of this was put together thanks to talking with some of the engineers that were that recorded the show. There's another fellow from Pi that wasn't there, but he helped me a lot, and along with a few other people that were helped put on the show and photographed it. So, starting out, to kind of preface this, the Who had recorded their fall 1969 U.S. tour with kind of the intention of putting out a live album. The aforementioned Bob Pridden recorded that just directly to stereo, the details of which I'm not too familiar with, but there were dozens of hours of these tapes that they'd recorded on that fall tour. And Pete Townsend has claimed repeatedly that it was too overwhelming a task to go through 80 hours or 100 hours or whatever it was to come up with an album to compile from those. But as you can see here, there was a compilation of some things put together at IBC in January of 1970. How far through all those tapes they kind of trolled to get to this point, I don't know, but whatever the case, this was rejected. They didn't do anything with it. And the decision was made they'd record a couple of shows on their upcoming UK tour instead for the purpose of an album. So Pi Studios was one of the few UK studios at the time that had mobile recording capabilities, and the Pi mobile recording unit was booked to record the shows at Leeds on February 14th and then Hull City Hall on February 15th. And unlike later trucks, mobile studios like the Rolling Stones mobile or the Ronnie Lane mobile. It wasn't actually a control room in a truck. It was just they actually had 2 transport vehicles that they used to take the gear to and from gigs, and they would just set up the gear somewhere at the venue. And so here's one of those transport vehicles with the PI chief recording engineer Vic Mail. And as you saw from Gordon's presentation, there's the shot of the stage being set up. That's the Leeds refectory, which was and still is basically a cafeteria. But they started using it for concerts, and there you can see the setup for the Who. There's a balcony that surrounds the room there, and where this photo is taken from is balcony cuts straight across the room. So basically, if you think this is about halfway back in the room, and then there's another, that far back behind where the photo's taken. That's a shot of the room as of last summer. I visited, and the balcony was closed when I was there, but you can still get a general sense of what it looks like today. Not too different. They changed the lights out a bit, but still the same basic space. So the crew that recorded Leeds consisted of Vic Mail, who was the chief recording engineer, Neville Crozier, who was the assistant engineer, Alan Perkins, who's the tape operator, and Terry Yeadon, who was the technical maintenance engineer. Unfortunately, I don't have a photo of the 4 of them together, but in this photo are Alan Perkins, Neville Crozier, Vic Mail, and then on the right is Kenny Detton. He wasn't at Leeds, but he was another PI engineer. And alas, the Who show was not the only show that was recorded that day. Neville Crozier said this. In the morning of February 14th, Vic Mail and I drove one van to Bingley, I think, to set up a 2-track system to record the Hammond Sauce Works brass band. Vic then went over to Leeds to help set up for the Who's recording, whilst I recorded the brass band. I then drove to Leeds before the concert, where Alan Perkins, Terry Yeadon, and Vic were already assembling the equipment. We were all staying in Bradford, which was in between the 2 recordings. So here we are back at Leeds. The recording equipment was set up one level below the refectory, as John Standerline, who helped put on the show as a member of the university's entertainments committee, explains here. The recording equipment had to go downstairs as there was not enough power on the upper level. The university refectory was where concerts were held, hops as they were then known. And by 1970, we had a substantial permanent stage purchased, which filled the semicircular section at one end of the building. When both seating areas of the refectory were opened up and cleared of tables, you could get 2,000 people in. The recording equipment was located downstairs in another restaurant called the Griffin Grill. There was slightly more upmarket food there. The power for the recording equipment came from the kitchen of that restaurant, hence the confusion. I didn't mention it, but previously it had been stated that the recording equipment had been set up in the kitchen. Continuing with what John Standerline said, a set of stairs from the side of the main stage went down to the Griffin Grill, hence it was used as a base for bands to change, etc. before a show with easy access to the stage. So there's Roger Daltrey talking with someone. And you can see that those windows there, those are the same curved windows that are upstairs in the refectory, just one level down. And there's the area, again, in 2019. It's a different name, but it's still it's a coffee shop now. And here are those stairs on the right side of the stage. This is on the main level, the refectory level, and then they go down to the downstairs area. So here are the mixers that were used to record the show. Two different mixers were used because neither provided 8 outputs needed for the 8-track recorder. The one on the right was a Pi custom 16 input 4 output mixer with Nuvista electronics, which was based on the Ampex MR70 electronics. which they had at the time and felt it sounded good. That mixer was later purchased by Jimmy Page after Pi had recorded Led Zeppelin at the Royal Albert Hall, and he liked the sound of the recordings. On the left was another custom Pi mixer that was a little bit earlier. It was named the Smellotron, which there's a whole story behind how it got that name, but nevertheless, it consisted of 3 4-input Vortexian mixers, kind of put together with basic echo sends and returns, metering and monitoring. It was originally designed for 3-track recording and had 3 outputs, but they continued using it right up through the 8-track era. Between those two, you got 7 outputs. Nobody's quite sure where the 8th output came from, if perhaps a mic was just put right into the 8-track or what. But at any rate, here's another shot of the setup downstairs. There's the Smellotron on the right, some various outboard gear above it, which again nobody's quite sure what that gear was. Pete Townsend there, and then behind Pete you can see the very large tannoy speakers in the Lockwood cabinets for monitoring. And this shot is not from Leeds. This is actually from the Goodbye Summer Festival held a year and a half later in September 1971. But that's Pi engineer Philip Newell, who started after Leeds was recorded, with a 3M M23 8-track machine. You can see it's in some kind of semi-portable road cases there. It was only one machine was used. They didn't use two machines for overlap at Leeds. Again, nobody I talked to is quite sure why, although it was suggested that they were quite expensive at the time, and it may have just been a budgetary concern. But because there was only one machine used, they had to stop it to change reels, and there was some form of communication with the band, so that when the reels were being changed, the band paused, and they must have had some things worked out ahead of time, because there's one reel change right in the middle of Tommy, and clearly they waited for them to start recording again. In no particular order, because I don't actually have the 8 tracks, but I know basically what's on them. One track had the 2 bass drums. Another track had the rest of the drum kit. Another track had bass. Another track had guitar. 3 more tracks for the vocals, and then the last track was a mono audience feed. And then based on the photos, the PA was exclusively used Shure 565 mics. I've counted at least 11 of those, 1 on each amp, 3 for the 3 vocalists. What do I have? About 6 on Keith Moon's drum kit. And but none of those were used for the recording except for Roger Daltrey's vocal mic. So for the recording, Pi used a almost completely different setup of mics. There's Roger Daltrey with his Shure 565 mic, the precursor to today's SM58. So Pi had a lot of AKG D224Es, and they used several on the Leeds recording, and FYI, I'm speaking to you right now through a 224. So here's Pete. You can see the 224 taped on top of his 565 for the PA. And again, there's John, John Entwistle, same situation. The recording mic, the 224, is just taped onto his Shure PA mic. And then there were 2 used for the drum kit. Here, I don't know if, can you see my cursor or not, Dan?
No.
Oh, okay, well, nevertheless.
Yes, I can.
Okay, so I don't know if you can see where I'm circling here. There's the 224 That was kind of between, pointing down kind of between two of his rack toms at the snare. And so it's about, I don't know, maybe a foot or 18 inches away from the snare. It's hard to tell exactly from the photos. And then here you can see in the bottom left-hand corner, there was another 224 kind of above the floor toms pointed towards the front of the kit. But those were the two mics that picked up the sound of the drum kit. As far as I know, I've not seen evidence of any other mics that would have been used for recording. There is a Shure mic overhead that would have been used for the PA, but I haven't seen any evidence that they would have used that for the recording, just those two 224s.
So, Roger has two sets of mics there, one in his right hand and two mics in his left hand taped together.
Yeah, that's a good catch, Dan. So the mic in his right hand is just the Shure that was his vocal mic, and he didn't have a mic stand. He just either held that or placed it on the stage if he wasn't using it. But what he's holding there is John Entwistle's mic stand and mics. I'm not sure why exactly, other than just because he could. I do know that based on the recordings, there's various parts of the instrumentals like Sparks and My Generation where Roger's on tambourine, and of course his mic did not have a mic stand, and so he would just set that on the ground and then kind of stand more or less in front of John Entwistle's mic stand to have his tambourine picked up a little bit through the PA in the recording. But
before we move on, there's some comments saying there's a U67 on the kick. I think maybe the last picture.
Yep, getting to that next.
Okay, thanks.
Yep, so then, U67, Neumann U67s were used to capture the rest of the instruments. There was two were used for the bass drums, one on each bass drum. You can see there. One was used on John Entwistle's amp, which is a little hard to see in this photo. Unfortunately, there's almost no photos of John Entwistle's side of the stage. I guess he wasn't very wasn't feeling very photogenic. The photographers didn't consider him very photogenic, I guess. But anyway, you can see that the U67 there near the top of his bass amp. And then Pete Townsend had another one on his guitar amp there. You can see in the lower portion of the screen.
2 pictures ago, it looked like a Shure on the kick drum. One more picture ago.
Yeah, right here. Yep, yeah. So those are for the PA. So you've got the PA mics here, and then the recording mics right there.
Thank you.
And then for the audience, a Neumann SM2 was used, which was just hung over the balcony. You can see it right there. It's just the one mic to pick up the audience there, just a mono feed. And so as people familiar with the recording know, there are these kind of mystery crackles throughout most of it, and the original album actually had a note on the label there: crackling noises okay, do not correct. And there's been lots of theories over the years about how that happened. It was a loose mic cable, or there was a cable on the stairs that when people stepped on it, it made noise or something. I don't think we'll ever know the answer for certain. I know that they heard them when they were recording, but they didn't know where they were coming from, and they were too busy to kind of do anything about them. One thing I'll note though is that the crackles were on the kick drum, bass, guitar, and audience tracks, which all used condenser mics. So it seems like it's not just a coincidence that those are the tracks that had the crackles, but again, not sure exactly what caused them. One other thing to note is that while there were a lot of crackles left on the recording, there was an attempt to edit some of those out. And Philip Newell, who helped me a lot with this, said that when he started at Pi, there was a chain of tiny little bits of tape stuck on the wall that each one of those little 3-centimeter bits was a crackle that they'd edited out when they were mixing leads. So a lot were left in, but if you put things under the microscope, there are a few spots where you can see that, oh, the audio actually jumps a split second because they cut a crackle out. And getting in terms of post-production, a decision had been made to replace some of the vocals in the studio. I guess they felt that some of the vocals were a little rough. John Entwistle claimed at one point that some of the vocals didn't record, but there are actually some mixes on bootleg that were rough mixes before they did any overdubs, and the vocals sound fine. They just weren't quite as polished as they would have liked. So it was most of the overdubs were John and Pete's backing vocals, but Roger also recorded a line in one spot in My Generation, and most of those vocals wiped the live vocals, but for that one Roger overdub, he placed it on Pete's vocal track. So in that case, actually, his live vocal and his overdub vocal exist on the multi-track. But fast forward about 25 years, and they first reissued Live at Leeds in expanded and remixed form, and another decision was made to overdub more new vocals, and those consisted of one line from John Entwistle and then a portion of a quick one from Roger Daltrey. And then that was 1995, and then in 2001 they released all of the songs from the show, not in unedited form, but all of the songs. And there were more overdubs done around that time, and for anyone who's familiar with that, the later overdubs really stick out. Clearly John Entwistle in the 90s did not sound anything like John Entwistle in 1970. But regardless, when there was another remix done in 2014 that again was the entire show more or less in the order it was recorded, but there were still some edits. They went back, they ignored all of those modern day overdubs. Obviously the 1970 ones were still there, they couldn't do anything about them, but got rid of all those modern overdubs. And that's basically it for the presentation, but just kind of going through here, there's just some more photos that I thought you'd be interested in. Here you can see Keith Moon. There's that overhead mic for the PA above him. On the left here, there's both recording and PA mics. There's John Entwistle, Pete Townsend, shot of Roger Daltrey and Pete Townsend. I didn't really talk about the PA at all, but you can see the WEM monitor on the side of the stage there. Another shot. You can again see a little bit of the mics on the drum kit there. And then there, for the PA, you can't really see it in this photo, but there was actually another Shure mic under the snare. And photos from the Hull the next night, you can see that more clearly. But again, everything I can tell is they just had those two AKG 224s capturing the sound of the kit, which I would never think that would result in a kind of large, well-balanced sound, but I think the results speak for themselves.
Who was high watt amplifiers? That's not WEM.
Well, those are the Pete's guitar amps.
Yeah. What company is high watt?
High watt is high watt, but there's a whole. I don't know I've read a story about it. I'm not an expert on that. I could find some links and get you that story, but I'm not one to kind of speak on that right now.
Okay.
I believe they came out of Sound City, if I'm not mistaken, but
hot-rodded Sound City amps, basically.
Yeah.
there was a bit of, I think there was the inevitable falling out of designers, etc. One lot wanted to go one way, one guy wanted to go the other. Pete Townsend had been a heavy Sound City user, and then when his favourite designer left and set up High Watt, he went with High Watt. I believe is the kind of bones of the story, but what all the inners and outers are, I don't know the full history sort of thing.
Yeah, that's my basic understanding of it. And then, there's a shot of looking back kind of from the stage. You can see here that balcony that cut across, and so presumably that would have been where Bob Pridden would have set up.
Outside stage.
Okay.
Side stage.
I've never actually seen any photos of him where he was set up, but at any rate, that's that earlier photos taken, and then again continued further back on the other side.
Is the audience all students, or is it just open to the community? Was this a school event?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not. I don't know, how many kind of other random people would have shown up, but yeah, I believe it was a school-sponsored event, and presumably primarily students, but.
A student union event in the UK, and even today, but certainly in the 70s and 80s, student unions had their, like an ENTS department, I guess you would call it, and they were pretty strict about who got in and out of these events. You had to have a student membership, not necessarily from that school or college. You could have one, there's affiliations with other colleges around about you, but you had to be a student union member, yeah.
I ran the ones for my school, and there was a student price and a non-student price. It wasn't strictly students, but it could differ for school. Go ahead. Sorry.
Just another shot of the audience there, and you can again see both that audience mic hanging over and a few sets of legs dangling over as well. There's another shot of Keith Moon, and here you can see both of the 224s kind of on either side of his kit. And what's interesting is I've not heard the 8 tracks directly, but on one of the bootleg mixes for the first about 3.5 songs, I think. There seems to be a bit of a stereo wash to the drums. So they're mostly centered, but there's not completely. And then after that, they seem to be completely mono. And I have a feeling, I'm not certain, but I have a feeling that this the mic that was kind of over on above the floor toms was initially being recorded on the bass track, and then by Tattoo, I think it was, they realized that, oh wait, that's on the wrong track, and they put it over on the track with the other 224.
That overhead mic looks like it's hanging out of its clip. It's just being held in by the cable.
Yeah, that's quite possible.
Not impossible with Moon whacking away at everything and shaking it.
Yep. Just another shot from the other side of the stage there, Pete. And there's Roger, and again you can see those monitors on the side of the stage. They apparently hadn't progressed to wedges yet, but they had the monitors on the side of the stage.
And that was the stage lighting.
That was some. But
follow spots.
Yeah, there were. If we go, once we get through, I'll go back to that shot in the beginning. There were some from the balcony all around as well. So
yeah, it's hilarious that those little things are there, though.
Yeah, and then there's John and Roger.
On that picture, how were they avoiding popping in the D224s from the vocal?
I couldn't tell you. I don't know if they just kind of rolled off the bottom end quite a bit. There's a little bit of popping, but I don't know how much am I popping. I'm not
at all. Does
all right,
that thing have built-in windscreen more than a normal condenser?
No, well, it's not a condenser. It's a dynamic.
Oh, is it? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Really? Okay.
Now, mind you, I'm about 3 inches off of it, so I'm not right on top of it like John would have been there. But I've heard from those Pi guys that they really liked the 224s for vocals. So
great.
I don't know. Again, just another shot where you can, there's a few shots here where you can kind of see the kit. There's what appears to be a humidifier on the stage. I don't know what the purpose of that was, but somebody pointed that out in the lower left-hand corner there.
Yeah. That's a fog machine, I think.
Well, I don't know. I've never seen any indication that there was any fog, but
that's a liquid fog machine. That's what that is. Horrible things.
But it's tiny. You need some space to have, unless it's an oil one.
Yeah, it's an oil one. That's what I mean. Yeah,
is it?
Horrible thing.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, made by Strand, like almost all the lighting kits there. Absolutely horrendous things.
Yeah, just a few more shots here.
These are great pictures.
Amazing how small the stage is.
Yeah.
Yeah, the whole space is not that large. And here you can see that there were a couple of other floor toms almost behind Keith, and there was a mic for the PA there, but didn't appear to be any mic for recording. I don't know how much he actually played those, but. And then this was last summer, just a shot looking back from the stage, and you can see that kind of the balcony heading across there, and then the back wall, which is actually, this balcony across here is about halfway back in the space. So there's a whole nother area behind there. And that's it for the photos. I don't know if any, go ahead.
Are those acoustical tiles added on the ceiling from after the recording was made? Because there's almost no acoustical treatment in that space.
Yeah, I think they were. Let me see. Yeah, they're. Well, I don't know if you can even see. Yeah, it's hard to tell in the photos, but there has been quite a bit of remodeling. That they no longer have this open railing up on the balcony. They got rid of all these hanging lights, so it's still pretty similar. But
there you go. Nothing up there.
Yeah, nothing above the stage area. Let's just go back here. Unfortunately, I don't know how many photos there are of the kind of above the audience area, but yeah, that's modern. And here you can't really see the beams
behind the beams.
Yeah, the beams hang down.
Okay.
I will say that I kind of touched on the official releases and overdubs and things like that. All of the official releases have edits to Young Man Blues, Shaken All Over, My Generation, and Magic Bus. There's a Live at Leeds complete bootleg that is the entire show, and those songs are all unedited on there. And I've done a kind of restoration and remaster of that. If anybody's interested, I can shoot you the Dropbox link.
Yes, please.
Right, I'll put it in the chat momentarily then.
Katie points out that they're trying to. It looks like they're trying to control the sound on the windows, meaning curtains, I assume.
Yeah, possibly. And then you can see there's this big white sheet that was hung behind the stage. They did that for The Who. I know the Stones played there, I believe, the following year in '71, and they did not have a sheet behind there, so I don't know what where the decision came from to place that there. But
they weren't doing any projections or anything.
Yeah, I was going to say they probably were doing some form of projection for that.
We haven't seen any of these pictures.
No, that's true as well. Yeah.
Photos look like they barely dimmed the lights.
Yeah. Well, this year they're working, but
yeah, it varies from photo to photo. Some it looks like it's pretty bright. Some like this, you can barely see any of the background. So it's kind of hard to tell based on the exposure on the photographs what it would have looked like. And also, you can tell here that somebody was using a flash. So some of these, probably would have been much lighter than what it looked like. There is, I don't know, maybe 5 minutes or so of film footage that somebody took from the balcony, just 5 seconds here, 10 seconds here, whatever. That some of that's been released, and That looks very dark, like you can only kind of see what the spotlight's on. But then again, how much of that's just the nature of
Film technology.
Exactly, film technology from 1970.
Yeah. They could have also had lights behind that white thing if it was translucent, and that would have made it more concerty.
Yeah, I haven't seen any indication of that, but
yeah. All right. These are great, Luke. Thank you.
Any other questions, or should I end it there?
Just one final comment. So thanks for sharing these photos. I just cannot believe the energy level that was in that room.
Yes. That
got captured on that recording.
Yeah, and I think just from a kind of editorial standpoint, I think it was kind of lightning in a bottle. I've heard comments that, they were always good and whatever. And I mean, that's not to say other shows from that era weren't good, but I think Leeds, of the shows I've heard, now I was not around back then, following them or alive for that matter, but of the shows I've heard recordings of, I think Leeds is probably the best, and it was well recorded too, other than those crackling noises. So I think those Pie guys really knew what they were doing. And then as a kind of tying into that, they recorded Hull the next night, and there were no crackling noises, but for some reason the bass didn't record for the first, 4 or 5 songs, I guess. And when they went to listen to the tapes, they just assumed that the bass didn't record at all, and so they just ignored them. But later they found out that, the rest of the show was fine, so they, when they went to issue that, they actually flew in the bass from Leeds for those first few songs, which I'm not a fan of those mixes, but that's a discussion for another day.
Are you guys able to talk a little bit about, just for completeness sake, about the career arc of The Who? Did this album really explode their career?
Well, I think it was Tommy that really did it.
Tommy that did it.
Well, yeah, but that was later. But at this point,
Tommy predated this. Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So Tommy was 69, and then during this tour, they were touring with Tommy. So they played. Mind you, they cut out a few songs, but they played Tommy straight through. So I think it's about 50 minutes that they played more or less nonstop, just straight through Tommy, which is, I think, pretty impressive.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Luke, I heard that the track layout for Tommy was similar to the one you described for that live recording.
I'm not as familiar with that, and I think it would have varied from song to song, but that Tommy was also an 8-track recording.
Yeah, and it was done in bits and pieces. Like they literally go out and gig to raise money for more studio time to make Tommy.
Right, and you can tell it does vary from track to track. Some things, obviously, the arrangements were different, so sometimes the track may have had 2 or 3 guitars, and other times maybe 1 guitar and organ and piano or something. The one thing I can tell you is, I believe, at least based on all the recordings I've heard, I believe the drums were completely recorded to 1 track, with the exception of Underture, which was the big instrumental, and that one they were recorded in stereo.
The Pie recording guys, they were part of. They're actually Pie, the record label. I saw somebody asking about that. We're actually an offshoot of a independent TV company, that was based around about London area. They did a lot of the recordings of the things that we know from the 70s. I mean, the Isle of Wight festival you were talking about, the film that you saw Hendrix on, that was the Pie van that did that as well. They were all over the place in those days. Their kit was actually quite impressive for what they carried around. They had a set of little Neve desks that they used as well sometimes.
So this is actually, I believe, on the way over to the Isle of Wight, and the Neve desks replaced the mixers I showed shortly after Leeds, probably within a few months, and by the time they did the Isle of Wight, they had the Neve desks.
Yeah. I recognised the big 3M recorders. One of those ended up lurking in the BBC in Scotland for quite a while in the sort of early 80s. I don't know if they ever actually used it or not, but I know that it was one of the ones from Pi, and they only ever had the two that were cased up like that. So I remember seeing it lurking in a corner in the BBC radio workshops in BBC Scotland.
Yeah, I think it was. I think they used the 8-track until maybe sometime in '71, and I think they upgraded to 16-track at that point.
Yeah, the studio went to 16-track quite early on. They were one of the first 16-track studios in London as well back in the day. Their actual base studio.
Yeah, and as an aside, you mentioned TV. I believe it was ATV that they were associated with, and if I remember correctly, the Pi Studios, not the mobile, but the studio complex, was built in what was meant to be ATV. It was meant to be ATV television studios, but they started building it, and they found out that if they would have put television studios in, the entire building would have had to have been union. So they shut that down, and then they built the recording studios like a few years later.
ATV were famous for one of the first TV companies to use outside contractors to supply spaces and camera crews and all sorts of stuff. They were quite advanced for their days, actually.
So, and another aside, so Vic Mail, I hope I'm pronouncing his name right, but he was the chief engineer. He died a number of years ago, but I believe everyone else that was involved at the time is still around.
Yeah, so when I was following up around the WEM stuff, I found a kind of web page talking about the stuff they did at Isle of Wight. It was fairly recently done, so it must be one of the guys that were involved in it. I can't remember his name right now, but I did find some stuff from that.
Yeah, it's interesting. So Isle of Wight, I don't have pictures handy, but if you look at those photos, that was also Pi, but the mic selection, it's a lot of the same mics, but not used in the same ways. And that one, at least the Who's show, sounds nowhere near as good as Leeds. So why that happened that way, I don't know, but the drums in particular sound pretty bad on the Isle of Wight recording.
Reading between the lines, I think there was quite a lot of technical issues in general at the Isle of Wight event, for by anything to do with wind and the lack of horn-loaded loudspeakers. I think actually just the whole stage setup and everything was a bit of a lash. You know, it was a bit of a mess in many ways, and I don't think it would have helped anybody's performance, never mind the actual technical recording part of it.
I'm sure the festival aspect didn't help either, where you're scrambling to get bands on and off and setting up and things.
For multiple days.
Right.
Yeah. Well, Charlie Watkins ended up in hospital halfway through it from stress.
Anybody have any other questions?
Yeah, I had a question. So I guess I'm kind of embarrassed to say I'm not familiar with this album based on how much you guys are praising it. And I guess I'm not.
Kids, God damn it!
I'm not the biggest Who fan. I focused a lot on the My Generation LP. You know, I'm more into garage and stuff like that. So, and so that also led me to Quadrophenia. And there's a space at the end where there's a dance, and it's got a very similar layout to that room, where it's got that wraparound on the top. I don't know, Luke, can you comment on that? Or can anybody comment on that? Was that like a popular room style in the UK or something?
I'm not the person to ask about that. I'll turn it over to anybody who may know.
Is that the movie Quadrophenia?
Yeah.
Okay. I haven't seen it.
I do know that refectory looked very like the one in Reading Art School and also one in Edinburgh. So it could well be a standard kind of college building shape, but I don't know where Quadrophenia was filmed even, so I'm not a clue.
If you look online, on YouTube. There's actually a documentary that was done when the Who was called the High Numbers. That I think was the basis of that dance scene.
Oh, okay.
So if anybody's making a trip to England, the Leeds campus is very pretty. I thought it was nice going through there. If you want to drive, Leeds is a bit crazy, but otherwise the campus is very nice. And then I did just put a link to that Live at Leeds Complete in the chat room if anybody wants that. There's notes about a lot of what I talked about today, kind of similar thing there, and then also some notes about what I did in terms of the restoration and remaster.
Thanks.
All right, thank you. And thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Luke.
Yeah, really, that was terrific. All right, Rick, are you up for talking about what was going on at the Jimi Hendrix concert at Sick Stadium in Seattle in July of 1970? There you go.
That. Amazing.
So that's Larry
Okay.
Rickstein right there?
That's Larry Rickstein there on the left. Let's see,
Oh, if you
right
don't-
there. That's Bob Vandenacker.
This was the
Bob-
opening act.
What?
This was the opening act.
I don't know, and I looked in the Seattle Times to see if I could find like the lineup and all that, and
I found a poster. and it
okay,
was
good.
Rube Tubin and the Rondonnas, Cactus, Catmother and the All-Nite Newsboys, and Jimi Hendrix.
Okay,
I was there. You can see me just over to the right of this. Of the
right,
screen.
yeah, right there.
Go ahead.
So, the deal was that I was in the Air Force at the time and happened to be stationed up near the Canadian border at a radar site, and I was allowed to work at a music store in Seattle when I wasn't on duty, and so about every 10 days I would be driving back to Seattle from Blaine, and I worked at Bandstand Music over in Bellevue, which is there's a Whole Foods there now. Anyway, Rube, aka Larry Rickstein, he was the store manager there, and he was friends with Bill Owens, who was the owner and CMF of Northwest Releasing, who was the promoter of this event. So Rube got Bandstand to do the backline for the show, and he also got his band up there. So the band was him and Bob Vandenacker and I think Buck Ormsby, and I don't know if they had a keyboard player or not. When they played gigs, the full name of the band was Rube Tubin and the Rondonnas, featuring Billy Scream, who couldn't make it. And I'm not sure of the background of all of that. Anyway, McCune did the sound for this, and you can see a Shure SM53 overhead, and I'm not sure what all the other mics were. And for some reason, geek that I am, I didn't really pay attention to what the PA was, other than the speakers, which I think were 8 A7s on each side of the stage, up on a riser, so they were a bit higher than the stage. And they played the is that called the grandstand?
Yeah, bleachers.
Yeah, and they didn't. There wasn't much out, on the sidelines.
Right.
It was just they just kind of, and I think I saw later in the in a review that they drew 8,500 people.
Really? That's all?
Yeah, that's all.
Wow.
And I don't know what capacity was for the stadium.
a lot more than that.
Yeah. Okay.
Huh.
So, so we'll fast forward now to Hendrix, and what they were doing to get bands on and off was that they were setting them up on one side of the stage, and then as the other band would finish, then they would just push the setup onto stage for the next group. And so I don't remember who was playing, but Jimmy was getting ready to go on, and they were getting his stuff set up. And I remember his drummer had a couple of A7s for monitors, just so he could hear. And Hendrix had, I think it was a quad Marshall stack, so 412 boxes and a couple of probably 100-watt heads. So they were getting that set up, and one of the stage hands yelled over to the side of the stage where Jimmy was and just went, "Hey, Jimmy, how do you want your amp set?" Trying to be helpful, right? Jimmy yells back without missing a beat, 10.
Yeah.
And the guy says, 10? What on 10? And Hendrix yells back, everything. So those are the Jimi Hendrix Memorial amp settings. And I think nowadays the kids call it diming the amp. So there was another show before this, and this was, I think, this was July 26, right? And Jimmy died in September of the same year.
This was the last time he was in Seattle.
Yes. So before this, there was a show with Janis Joplin, and there was a band from San Francisco called Pacific Gas and Electric. Mm-hmm. And so I was on the back line again, and one of the reasons for me to be on the back line was, since I was the repair guy at the store, if something blew up, there was maybe a chance that I could fix it on the spot. So that got me into the show, which was fine with me. So PG&E are playing their set, and they had an acoustic 360 for the bass amp. And people here know what that is, or do I need to describe it slightly?
I know what it is.
I have no idea.
Okay, it's a horn-loaded bass amp. Had an 18-inch Sirwin-Vega speaker in a W box, and unusually, it had the power amp mounted in the bottom of the bass bin, and then the head of the amplifier, that went piggyback on top, was just a preamp, and so it plugged into the bass box, and and everything got power, and that's how it worked. And the cool thing was, of course, that if you wanted more output, then you could just add another bass cabinet and plug it in, and you automatically got another power amp. So that was way cool. One of the problems, though, was that since it was horn loaded, the sound up near the box was not nearly what the sound was 50 feet out. And so up close, they tended to sound really thin. And when you got 50 feet out, they were bigger than hell. So the PG&E guy apparently had the thing on 11. And at the last song, I heard somebody yell, "There's smoke." And I look up on stage, and sure enough, there's smoke billowing out of the bass amp. Well, that was kind of the end of their set. So we muscled the cabinet down to the ground, and because we could, we popped it open. And sure enough, the 18-inch speaker was smoldering. It was on. It had been on fire. We had emptied a CO2 extinguisher into it, and the sucker burned. So on the Monday, I called Vega to see about getting a replacement. They had already heard about the fire. It was amazing. And turned out what had happened was that production was playing around with the glue used to hold the voice coil and the cone together, and they had made a change to it and had changed the flash point. And the result was that that's what caused it to catch on fire. So Vegas sent us a new speaker, and away we went.
Rick, at this show with Hendrix, I remember that there was one of those modern-looking A7s that Altec made for a while.
Yeah, that was the drum monitor.
It was over near him, though. I remember there was one pointing at him.
Could be. Could be they had more than... I just remember there was at least one behind the drummer.
Yeah, okay.
And those were self-powered.
Oh, really?
Yeah, but, you know, woefully underpowered.
Yeah.
It was a 60-watt bass amp and a 30-watt treble amp. They were bi-amplified. I'll give them credit for that.
The regular unpowered ones were much stronger, it seemed like.
Well, yeah, because you had the freedom of putting whatever amplifier you wanted on them.
Yeah.
So, like at Eagles, for the summer of '67, when I did the sound there, we had 4 A7s and a Mac 275 on each side of the stage. And so each channel of the Mac drove one of the A7s. So that was 75 watts on each speaker.
They didn't stay with A7s, because when I started going there in maybe the fall of '67, could that be right?
Well, my last show there was
spring of
Halloween weekend.
Yeah.
And then they got Boyd rented the system with the A7s was rented from Electrocraft. And I think the idea was just to get him through the summer concert season, and then he eventually I don't know if he rented or bought or rented with the option of buying a system from a sound company in Hawaii called Voice of God.
Ah, right.
And it was Altec stuff.
Yes.
And
fabric covered low frequency and sectoral horns on
yes.
kind of platforms. They were clearly boxable, so there was like the tray of a road case underneath the horn. The horn was bolted to that, and there were, I think, 3 boxes side by side, 3 low frequency boxes, each with a horn on top of it, with the footprints matching up of the box and the horn, more or less.
That was pretty standard. That was pretty standard kit for rock and roll PA systems in those days.
It was a nice sounding rig.
Yeah, it was.
And somehow they augmented it for it looked like the same boxes at the Seattle Pop Festival, which was the summer before this 6 Stadium show. They got more somewhere, and they had some long throw horns too.
Maybe
longer horns.
What year was that? That festival?
69.
They could have gotten stuff from Swanson Sound in Oakland, or from McCune.
Yeah, but McCune
I don't know,
brought A7s to this.
I don't know if Bob Stern was happening by then.
Right.
He was certainly happening by 1971, when I got out of the Air Force and was working with Rube.
Yeah, and we'll be remiss if we don't talk about Larry Rickstein for a bit, since you've got this picture of him. He went on to have a really large PA. He had the largest PA in the Northwest for a while, I believe.
Yeah, well,
Charlie.
I designed that system when I worked at Bandstand.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Cool.
And it was, I think it was 8 A7s, and we didn't have a lot. There wasn't a lot of money, so I had to kind of design it to a budget. We started out using Dynaco 60-watt amplifiers for everything, and after the first couple shows, they went out and bought 4 Crown DC 300s. And what else? The A7s were made by a guy that worked at the store.
Not Larry Guerin, was it?
No, Bruce George.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I didn't know Bruce was into that.
Yeah, well, Bruce, I met Bruce when I met Rube and Bill McDonald because we all worked at the store.
Yeah.
So that PA had a homemade mixer with Altec modular mic preamps in groups of four times four, feeding a 1567. So we used the 1567's inputs as
Summers?
Group masters.
Yeah. Yeah. I used to run follow spots at the Heck Edmondson, and when their shows would come in, I would see the PAs. This was before I was into PAs, but I noticed it. Anyway, and Larry came in a number of times for that, and Pink Floyd was there with their PA, and there was a PA with a bunch of Altec. Is it 604s that are the coaxes?
Mm-hmm. With a little multi-cell in the center.
Yeah. It was nothing but that. And Larry sounded better by far than those things.
Okay.
So whatever. Any more about this?
It's interesting to see the contrast, isn't it? From what we were doing in the 70s, you know, what Charlie and a couple of other guys were doing in the UK and compared to the American stuff. I guess it's because the venues were bigger. You had to use the horn stuff more than we did. You know, I mean, that university refectory that you saw in the Leeds 1970 thing, that was pretty typical venue, you know, for bands. The university circuit was a big money earner for touring bands, and that was the size of room you were in, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
The large format horns were kind of the only way to get the SPL that we needed.
And as John, whose name I don't remember now, who wrote the Hanley book, points out, the movie theater stuff was what was readily available, and that was all big boxes and big horns. So
right,
that was what they adapted. It was surprising to see the WEM stuff that Fleetwood Mac had, because it was all pretty much direct radiators or little tiny horns.
Yeah, that was what did the big letdown with the WEM stuff, and that's kind of what killed it.
Yeah.
I think it was Yes, the band Yes went over to America and brought back some of the Kelsey horns, or the Morris horns.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a bit of an eye-opener, I believe, for, you know, bands like The Who and others like that, you know?
Yeah.
Was the mixer set up to the side of the stage or in front?
You know, I don't remember.
I want to say out front, because certainly the year before in the summer, that was common. That was normal out front.
Yeah. And there was no monitor desk.
Uh-huh.
Right. Right. At Eagles, the only monitors were two speakers on one on either side of the stage. That was the monitor system.
Yeah. And I think the way that the 1567s were ganged together is that each mixer's output became an output, and they were all the same. I mean, so I think they used one of the mixer outputs to run front of house, and the other one, which would have been the same mix, it became the monitor output. Pretty crude.
The WEM guys, they used to use the
Beatles
headphone.
at Shea Stadium.
What's that?
I say they did something similar with 1567s with the Beatles at Shea Stadium. They had for the recording they had one mixer, and then for the vocal PA system they had another mixer.
Uh-huh. So there's a review of the Hendrix concert.
No, this is the Janis Joplin one.
Oh, sorry. You're right. Okay. Let's see.
I love the movie ads.
Yeah. Come on, Mr. Mouse. You got to get the mouse cursor over to the other screen.
You see the John Dance Theater there over Paint Your Wagon. Ryan Dance was the son, and he was in my class in high school. There's Jimmy.
So I guess that wasn't at that show. That was a stock photo from something else.
Yes.
And let's see. There's an article from, which was an interview of the promoter guy.
Bill Owens.
I could send these along if people are interested.
Yeah, I'd like to see that.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Finally, this was after Jimmy had passed away, and he left his estate to his father, which was apparently $500,000. And as the article says, he's going to keep his job, which was he was a gardener. Interesting thing there, you can see in the second column, about a fourth of the way down.
Yeah.
They published his address.
Yeah. That's amazing.
So
that's what I'm laughing about.
I went and looked, and the house is still there, and there's a picture of it on the assessor's website. I could
Wow.
I could go grab that and include that with all this stuff.
Cool.
So anyway, that's what I've got.
Rick, did you ever get to meet Chas Chandler, who was Hendrix's manager?
No, I didn't.
No.
He was probably
I was just
on at that time.
Sorry?
I was just
He was
one of the
probably-
guys on stage.
Yeah, Chandler was probably gone by that time. Didn't he get forced out by Jeffries?
Maybe you're right. You're probably right, actually.
Because this is right before Hendrix died, so
Yeah.
that would have been late.
I met Chandler with this, once in later years before he died. And how a small little guy like that could have literally ruled the British kind of promotion manager region, I have no idea. But he was successful and he did his bit, I guess.
Wasn't he the original bassist in the Animals?
Yeah.
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 And he played on a lot of people's records, a lot of these artists' records. Chandler would play on them, usually uncredited, but he would often play on them. He could play a few instruments, I believe, and he would often play on them. He certainly would always get some sort of producing credit or production credit or engineering credit, even in some of them.
Rick, was this was in the era after Noel Redding left on bass, right?
Yes.
I don't know.
Yeah, Billy Cox was there for this show, and Mitch Mitchell was the drummer.
Right. So this was the Last Experience. This was after Band of Gypsies and the Last Experience lineup.
Yes. Yeah, this was 2 months before he died. 2 months? Yeah, 2 months before he died. This was the month before the Isle of Wight, or month or two before the Isle of Wight.
Gordon, I always heard with the Isle of Wight, it wasn't just the sound system. Wasn't there bad acid going around that festival?
The entire festival was a shambles. My cousin was actually involved with, indirectly involved with Pink Floyd and people through Peter Jenner. And I wasn't at that one. He wouldn't let me go to that because I think he knew it was going to be a nightmare. I was at the one before. There was 2 Isle of Wight festivals, which everybody forgets because they remember that one. But there was another one before that, which was much more like probably like a Newport Jazz Festival kind of vibe. And I remember being at that as a 9 or 10-year-old kid. But the second one, my cousin was at it, and he literally did a runner. He just left. Apparently it was every bit as bad and somewhat worse than what people would say it was. I mean, Hendrix was supposed to go on stage at about 11 o'clock, but I don't think he actually got on stage till about 2 or 3 in the morning. You know, it was just running so badly. The whole thing was a complete shambles. You know?
Yeah, and people were crashing the gates, right?
They knocked the whole wall down.
Yeah.
There was like a fence wall along the back end of the site, and I've seen pictures of it, and they did the whole, like, hundreds of yards of the thing are just put down on the floor. A bit of the old Woodstock thing going on there. A part of the reason was they actually charged for that time a fairly reasonable amount of money for the tickets for it. And remember, all the Hyde Park free concerts were still had just finished happening. So there's a bit of a, we're going to watch these guys for nothing or else kind of thing going on as well, you know. The whole thing was a really bad attitude. Man. Sorry?
Music belonged to the people, man.
Yeah, that was very much a British thing, probably. Yep. And in a way, you know, Pete Jenner and his colleagues kind of, brought that on themselves a little bit. Although Pete Jenner had nothing to do with the actual promotion of the gig, 3 or 4 bands that were involved with were in amongst the acts, you know. And I think he paid for it a little bit that time.
I think the Message of Love, is that the one that has the police and police chasing the kids around?
Yeah.
I feel like I've seen that multiple times, and I've watched the movie multiple times, so I think it's that. And they interview some of them, and they're saying about music belonging to the people, and it should be free, man.
Yeah.
So.
There was another festival held a couple of years after that up in Grangemouth in Scotland, not far from the other side near Edinburgh, and it literally degenerated into a riot. It was in quite a cramped kind of space, and I can't recall anybody getting killed at it, but I know there was some pretty serious, like fights broke out and stabbings and just general bad things, and I think that was largely the end of these big randomly happening venues. The Reading Festival kept going and Glastonbury kept going, but they were organised differently, and they also had been established quite, especially the Reading and the National Jazz Festivals, they'd been established for easily 10 or 15 years before that. So they had a bit of a different thing.
Isn't Glastonbury still going?
Oh yeah, Glastonbury's still going, yeah. Reading's still going as well.
Or probably not right now, but yeah.
Yeah. Look, see, Glastonbury, I mean, you could go on about Glastonbury. Glastonbury was was a completely different thing. It was a happening that had music at it. It wasn't really a music festival. It was a kind of an arts festival more than anything else. Your man just decided he was going to have an event in his field. He's a dairy farmer in real life, and he just decided he was going to have an event in his field, and he booked T-Rex, Mark Bolan, and that was the headline act. And because he had him, he managed to convince a few other bands of the day to go and play for him. And lo and behold, look what you've got now, the absolute juggernaut that is Glastonbury,
So as long as we're talking about Isle of Wight, or were a minute ago, is anybody curious to see? There's a page here on the Pie Crew at Isle of Wight. I could
Yeah,
share.
if you've got that picture, I was going to look for it as well. I think I know what you're going to show, but go on.
All right, let me share my screen here. Do you have screen sharing turned off, Dan?
No, it's on.
Oh, wait, there it is.
Down the bottom there.
All right, yeah, so here's the that picture I showed you before. There's some guys hanging out with the van there.
Is this on the Isle of Wight page? There's a real extensive Isle of Wight.
It's ukrockfestivals.com.
Yeah, that's a good set of I stole a few pictures off of their website, I have to confess.
So here are the Neve mixers.
Yeah,
it was
it
was in 4 parts, and they could put them together in various configurations. Again, this was
the BCM 10.
I think it was a Model 80. I'm not an expert on this, but this was before they had the the kind of recording control room in a truck. So this stuff was just set up in the back of the truck. Here's Stan Tonkel and Tio Macero from CBS. They came over to, produce or supervise or something. And there's Stan Tonkel, and I guess that's all there is there. But
yeah. Didn't you find a story about this? Somebody talking about, or Tio maybe, talking about their experience there?
Hey,
that's quite possible.
Yeah, Dan?
Yeah.
I think we talked about that for the Joni Mitchell showing in New York.
That's what it was.
And, Elliot and
Don Palouse.
And Don, we're talking about their experiences and recording for CBS separately and working with the Pi guys for the Joni Mitchell Isle of Wight thing.
That's what it was. It was the Joni Mitchell movie where they showed Elliot edited that for Murray Lerner's estate, Elliot Kisseloff.
That's where I heard about that dynamic with the crowd busting in and the bad vibes.
Yes, that was it. That was it. He put a lot of footage
at the festival.
Go ahead, Tommaso. What?
Wasn't Miles Davis at the festival as well?
Yeah, I believe so.
The one before that.
There.
Yeah, that's what I was hinting at.
That Pi recording system turned up at a lot of events. I remember it. They used to run around with those three or four section mixing discs. I can still remember them using those in the late 70s, maybe even into the 80s. I remember them being in the Glasgow Apollo, recording, I think, Rush, maybe. They certainly that must have been around about the era of 2112. So what's that, 77, 78? And I'm sure it was those guys it was that kind of kit that they had. They certainly still didn't have an outside broadcast truck. They still brought all their gear in and lurked around looking for a room and set it up. That was just the modus, the way they operated,
My understanding is that Pi did move to a larger truck where they could monitor in and things, but then they sold that to what was Richard Branson's studio? I can't think of the name right.
Mountain Studio.
Well, it had a specific name.
I know the one you mean. It's the one that what's his name recorded in.
Tubular Bells. Yeah.
Mike Oldfield.
Right.
That was Genesis. I can't remember. Yeah.
But I'll think of it. But at any rate, they purchased the Pi Mobile, and that became the Manor Studios. So that became Manor Mobile number 2 in like the mid '70s or something.
I do remember them rocking around, though. I remember they were one of the first people I ever saw with a proper split, mic split. I remember that as well.
Are you guys familiar with Bob Auger from Pi? He was one of the older guys in that era.
I never knew him.
I know the name. Yeah.
UK engineering legend. He was good friends with my dad, and actually, when my dad took his truck over and recorded in Manchester in the mid '50s, that was Mercury working with Pi. So they saw a similar setup in the '50s.
Yeah,
with having the tape machines and all the control system in the truck, but the actual recording room being somewhere else.
I mean, the BBC. Sorry, guys.
I'm going to step in here. We're getting towards the end of our time together, and I'm wondering if we want to do a common research into the Isle of Wight festivals and share information about that. I think that would be really interesting to see what we can find out about it in a week. And I'm also wondering if Janie would want to do a presentation about stuff that you've done and let us hear some stuff maybe.
Oh, sure. Yeah. I've got everything on my LTO drive, which is on my computer, and I can just drag it on the. I don't know that I would play it on the LTO. They say you can, but there's sometimes some latency issues, so I could drag it onto the desktop or something to play it. You know,
maybe you could prepare some portion of different music to give examples of whatever you want to give examples of.
Okay.
And prepare some talking part of what you want to talk about.
Sure. Sure.
How's that for a...
I have no idea what I want to talk about because you just brought it up. So yeah.
Well, you got a week, plenty of time. So
yeah.
Is that are you up for that?
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks. That's a great idea.
Great. Okay. And what do we want to do about the Isle of Wight? Do we want to? I'm thinking that's probably a good hour, maybe. That we could.
I'll see if I can find some stuff out about the 1969 one, which is the one that nobody knows about. But Bob Dylan played at it, amongst others. It was quite a gig. I do remember that gig very well. It was the first big gig I was ever at.
I have one brief thing to mention about Isle of Wight while we're talking about it. The Chicago, the band Chicago, played there, and there was a big hoopla about 2 or 3 years ago where they remixed and remastered the Chicago set. They said it had been unreleased for years because it was a substandard recording, blah, 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 blah. And they completely, there's a whole story about what they did to remix it, and it sounds worse than you can imagine. They took the 8 tracks and turned them into about 50 tracks, and the bass drum is now on 3 tracks, and we gated everything and did this, and it sounds worse than Zoom is what it sounds like.
Oh, dear.
And they go on about how great it is, and they were able to fix it up, and it sounds awful. The drums sound, there's no high end on the drums, and as soon as somebody starts singing, there's all this leakage, and the high end comes in, and it just anyway.